I'm delighted to be joined by Davinder Virdi, who is a Fellow of the Institute of Business Consulting with 30 years experience as a leader with multiple C-suite roles in both global strategy and transformation, which includes significant FTSE and public sector engagements within complex multicultural and international regions. He's a guest speaker and lecturer on strategy, transformation and operational management at the Executive MBAs, and is also a mentor to a variety of SMEs, entrepreneurs and academic institutions. His recent profile highlights include Interim Chief Operating Officer at the Royal College of Nursing, the RCN, with accountability for strategic leadership and operational management across the group. Prior to this, Davinder was Interim Director of Transformation and Strategy at the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulator, also working to this role during the 2020-21 pandemic years. Welcome, Davinder.
Thank you very much, SJ, and thank you for that introduction.
My pleasure. It's good to have you with us today. So to start the questions, you've been operating as an interim executive, as I say, as well as a consultant for a number of years now. Given your cross-sector experience in commercial, FTSE and international companies, as well as the public sector, how has this benefited you in roles, and in particular the ones I've just mentioned?
Well, thank you for the question, SJ. And indeed, it's been a long road and lots of learning experiences. And I think specifically with the question you've asked, yes, I have been very fortunate to be able to learn from a variety of sectors, including, as you say, the commercial organisations, or whether it's FTSE 100 or indeed public sector, including central government. So I think some of the key benefits of all of these roles are probably centered around four key areas. The first of those is very much around the ability to understand not only the corporate but the executive and governance structures in organizations, whichever sector they may sit in. That together with also being able to bring in that best practice from those cross-sector organizations, and then to be able to balance the commercial and cultural nuances and requirements, I think has been some of the key learning points. And then finally, of course, you can then transport, as I call them, transportable solutions, bring across whether it's models, techniques, or learning points from organizations. Just to give you a flavour and an example, so you mentioned the MHRA. When I joined the executive board there was no directorate effectively with regards to the remit which I'd been given. There was no budget or indeed governance arrangements around how we were going to undertake the work. The work was critical. It was following the exit from the EU, significant losses in revenues for the organisation and a transformation that was required. So I immediately procured one of the big four firms in terms of professional advisors to bring in very quickly some capacity and capability, which we didn't have. I recruited individuals, specialists, and set up the frameworks, the governance frameworks, to be able to report to the board and make decisions. So that was very, very useful to be able to do that quickly. Otherwise, it would have been a very difficult engagement. On the commercial side, again, for example, I think my experiences with private equity companies and commercial organizations, it's very different from a public sector environment where year on budgets are produced, not necessarily the cutthroat world of some of the commercial private equity organizations. So again, I had to very quickly identify the compelling need and communicate that in an unambiguous way, clear communication, so that senior managers and the executives understood what we had to do. So again, that was very helpful to be able to use the techniques or the approach I would use in that commercial environment. And then finally, transportable solutions, which I was referring to, for example, using commercial strategy development techniques, which again may not necessarily in public sector central government organizations be widely used, but very helpful to identify future financial stress points, for example. So all of those learning points, yes, they're useful, very, very useful, and it's good to be able to use those in different environments.
Absolutely.
And across boundaries, international boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Picking up on the model side, which you've mentioned, utilising the support of change, I think you made reference to the enterprise-wide model. From your experience, how open are organisations in general to change?
Not very much, to be honest, is the answer.
Yeah.
Change is, difficult. It's not something which individuals like and organisations don't like. I think they get used to being in a comfort zone. They get used to being in their day-to-day business mode. So when somebody like myself comes along and it's a distressed environment, it does create a lot of resistance. So the best way around it, I found, is actually to be able to communicate the mutual benefits of what is happening. So not just for the board or the executive, but for your everyday staff member who may be doing a project or involved in a project, but not able to relate that to the strategic vision. So it is difficult. Organisations are resistant to change, but you have to find a way around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely understand on that one, for sure. But leading on that, picking up on those additional themes you started to discuss, being parachuted into that distressed environment, of which the challenges are variable, of course, but in some ways extremely similar, whether that was to do with organisational structure, finance, or culture. What do you believe are the main three attributes in delivery to bring to that table, and at pace, of course?
It's probably more than three, but I'll pick up the top three ones. So I think, firstly, SJ, I think it goes without saying, when somebody at my level comes into an organisation, you don't have a learning curve. You don't have the luxury of a learning curve or training or time to really spend getting to know the organisation, its issues, its sector and so on. You have to come in sprinting. You have to do all of those activities very quickly. So in a normal sort of environment, you would come in as an executive and get to know the organisation and so on. So we have to go in there and we have to do it very, very quickly. So that means basically taking the heavy load. So, you mentioned a distressed environment. What you actually get are quite a lot of distressed executives. Sure. My job is to unstress them and take some of that capacity and capability. So I think land sprinting is the way I would describe it. You have to definitely be able to do that. I think a couple of other areas. One is, or the second one is creating capacity and capability. So again, the reason people like myself join as interims is because there is stress points in the organisation. I think executives and managers are busy with their day-to-day roles. They don't have the opportunity or the desire to pick up those challenging situations or make those decisions. So I will go in and I will take some of that stress and create additional capacity and capability. That's very important, taking ownership for creating the environment for change and resilience in the organisation. And I think thirdly, it's very important to create that financial and resilience and sustainability platform. Inevitably, organisations, when they have to make decisions to resolve short-term issues, it involves money and funds and finances. So a longer-term view of the financial trajectory of the organisation has to be done very early. So that's the third point, which I think, again, going back to the MHRA or RCN, I deployed what I call an enterprise-wide portfolio model. Now, what that does is it looks at all the critical investment demands and priorities in the organisation. It looks at business cases, and it looks at, for example, a transformation that you might have to undertake. So all of that has to be understood and communicated, and decisions made for the long-term future as opposed to short-term management decisions. So it's about relating it to the corporate strategy over 5 years, for example. So land sprinting, create that capacity capability, and I think that platform for the financial resilience and sustainability.
That's an interesting expression, land sprinting. Any recurring themes of resistance or question buy-in from your client stakeholder group? And how do you navigate that from numerous views, actually, at time?
So yes, for sure, there are definitely recurring themes. And one of those, I think, is that conflict in and managing expectations, the conflict in individuals wanting to, achieve their goals, their ambitions, their objectives, or their own divisional business plan, but not understanding the wider picture, the corporate strategy, or the corporate sort of objectives of, the executive or the board. So I think that is definitely a recurring theme, and the way, again, I find is a very valuable way of navigating that resistance is identifying the mutual benefits. So collaboration between directorates, divisions, teams, individuals, to show where actually, if they collectively take accountability and deliver as a holistic team and unit, is much better than individual goals or objectives. So that is certainly one methodology I deploy, and it works very well.
Very natural, absolutely. I can see that would work tremendously. So obviously talking about interim roles by the very nature, of course, they're very time limited, and it's clear of what the identified delivery of outcomes needs to be administered. How do you navigate that intention of focus, which ultimately concludes with an embedded legacy of change? Quite a question.
It's a very good question, and actually, in simplistic terms, I may well be asked, what did you achieve then? What have you left behind? Whether it's over a 12-month, 18-month or 2-year period. I think, I would compartmentalise it in 3 ways. The first is be very clear about where that vision or ideal end state is. Quite often you have not only executives and board level members, but senior managers working on different trajectories. They've got their own specific aims and goals, which you have to bring together. So there has to be a common point that everybody's working towards. So if you want to embed change, leave a legacy, you have to ensure that everybody is actually working towards that same end state. So that's very important to do very, very quickly. I think the second one, SJ, is very much around what I call reverse mapping. So it relates to the first point in taking that end goal. I think senior leadership teams, managers, executives have to understand what are the stepping stones to get to that point. So again, trying to corral them, if you like, away from individual journeys into a central journey is very important. And you do that by, this term I use, reverse mapping, which is creating those stepping stones so they have a joined up picture of where they're actually headed and why their team's efforts, outputs, contributions are contributing towards that strategic vision. And then thirdly, I think agreeing the investment levels at the outset. So again, if you're going to realise and embed change and create a transformation, and transformation, by the way, is an overused term in my assessment, because transformation is dramatic, drastic, it's painful, and it's usually time bound. I think what organisations do is they tweak change in process or solutions, which isn't necessarily transformational. So if you want to really create transformation, it requires funding, investment, which again has to be agreed up front. So to give you an example, again, the MHRA, having left the European Union, significant losses in revenue and a very compelling need and rationale to undertake a transformation. I very quickly deployed the enterprise-wide portfolio analysis, as I mentioned before, to understand what the real requirements for the investment were for the transformation. So this is going to be a restructure of the organisation, new technology, and tens of millions of pounds worth of investment. So that had to be agreed with the Cabinet Office, with the board of the MHRA and the senior executive team. Again, we did that very quickly so that it would have impact within the first 6 months, which was very successful in the end.
With the huge challenges that any organisation is working to, with also that heightened level of scrutiny, so, from a regulatory perspective or a department perspective as well. So it is that additional scrutiny that one is always very mindful of. And when it comes to reverse change, how is that reviewed, really?
Yes, so I think in terms of business as usual, for example, in terms of the scrutiny and a regulatory environment, that is part of the day-to-day function of executives to make sure in their business as usual, as we call it, role, they're doing that. So when you're undertaking transformation and change, you're creating new scenarios, new processes, new solutions, models, ways of working, and so on. So I think that ongoing scrutiny matrix, if you can call it that, is very, very critical. So it is a very good question, and I think that is very much something that I attempt to do along the journey of change, because it's very easy to forget that there is that underpinning scrutiny going on. And if you are changing ways of working, then you have to bear that in mind and make sure that is being aligned with the new proposed operating model, for example, as we did in the MHRA.
Sure, absolutely. So to summarise, the key skills to bring forward are as follows: acceleration of intention of change, I'd say, is definitely one. Clarity of the perimeters which are acceptable for that change. Stakeholder buy-in is obviously absolutely paramount and essential from day one. Conscious of the legacy you seek to embed as well. Know the time frame you're working to effectively and efficiently as well. And finally, to hit that ground running, or as you say, sprinting. Thank you so much for joining me today, Davinder. As always, it's an absolute pleasure to see you.